Imagine lying down at night with nothing beneath you except the ground. No mattress, no pillow, no soft blanket, just a dark shelter, a cold floor, and the sounds of the world outside. For most of human history, this was completely normal. But ancient peoples still slept, and somehow they had ways to make the hard ground feel surprisingly comfortable. The strange thing is, humans were never really without beds. They simply didn't look like the beds we know today. Long before bedrooms existed, people had already discovered something important. The ground might be where you live, but it doesn't have to be where you sleep. Early humans probably began with whatever nature gave them: dry grass, leaves, moss, animal skins, soft bark, feathers. Anything that could separate the body from cold, damp, rough ground could become part of a sleeping place. And that simple idea may have been far more important than it sounds. Because sleeping directly on the ground comes with problems. The ground steals heat from your body. Moisture can seep upward. Sharp stones can press against your ribs. Insects can crawl underneath you. And during the night, even a small drop in temperature can become uncomfortable. So the first bed may not have been designed for comfort at all. It may have been designed for survival. Imagine a small group of humans preparing a shelter as darkness approaches. They clear away stones, they scrape the ground flat. Then they collect dry vegetation. Layer after layer, they build a small mound. The result isn't a mattress, but it is warmer, softer, drier, and much safer for a sleeping body. Over generations, humans would have learned which materials worked best. Some plants made better bedding than others. Some stayed dry longer. Some were soft. Others were useful because they kept insects away. This meant that sleeping became another skill humans learned from their environment. And there is something fascinating about this. Your ancestors didn't need a furniture store to understand ergonomics. Their bodies taught them. If one sleeping surface caused pain, they changed it. If another kept them warm, they remembered it. If a particular material attracted insects, they avoided it. The bedroom was essentially invented from trial and error. But there was another problem: heat. This may have been one of the biggest reasons ancient sleeping arrangements developed around fire. A fire could warm the shelter, it could provide light, it could discourage some predators, and it could make a cold night survivable. But humans couldn't simply sleep beside a roaring fire. That would be dangerous. So instead, sleeping spaces were often arranged around carefully controlled heat sources. And in some environments, people could use heated stones or embers to retain warmth. The basic principle was simple. Don't just make the sleeping surface softer, make the entire sleeping environment warmer. But ancient humans didn't all sleep the same way. There was no single prehistoric bedroom. A person living in a cold environment faced completely different problems from someone living in a hot desert. A person sleeping in a cave had different options from someone sleeping beneath trees. And someone living in a permanent settlement could build something very different from someone constantly moving. In colder regions, insulation became especially important. Animal hides could be placed beneath the body, more could be pulled over the body, and thick layers could trap pockets of air. That trapped air mattered because air is a poor conductor of heat. So a layer of fur or plant material wasn't merely soft, it was insulation. The same basic principle is still used in modern sleeping bags and insulated clothing. Ancient people didn't need to understand thermodynamics, they only needed to notice that certain materials kept them alive through cold nights. But what about pillows? Did ancient humans sleep with their heads directly on the ground? Sometimes, probably. But eventually, humans discovered another simple trick: raise the head. Archaeological evidence shows that people in different ancient societies used objects that functioned as headrests. Some were made from wood, some from stone, others from plant materials, and they could look surprisingly different from modern pillows. A hard wooden headrest sounds terribly uncomfortable to us, but it wasn't necessarily meant to feel like a fluffy pillow. It could support the neck, it could keep the head slightly elevated,
And in some cultures, it may have helped protect carefully arranged hairstyles from being crushed during sleep. In ancient Egypt, for example, headrests were sometimes beautifully crafted. Some were simple, others were elaborate objects. That tells us something important. Once humans solved the basic problem of sleeping safely, they started thinking about comfort, status, and design. A sleeping place could become more than somewhere to collapse at night. It could become part of culture. And this transformation happened surprisingly early. One of the most remarkable discoveries related to ancient bedding comes from South Africa. Researchers studying Border Cave found evidence suggesting that people living there thousands of years ago used layers of plant material as bedding. Some of these layers were repeatedly burned. Why? One possibility is that fire helped control insects and other pests. So ancient bedding may have served several purposes at once: comfort, insulation, cleanliness, and pest control. Think about how clever that is. A pile of grass doesn't look like advanced technology, but if you choose the right plants, arrange them correctly, maintain them, and replace them when necessary, you've created a surprisingly sophisticated sleeping system. And humans weren't finished. As communities became more settled, sleeping surfaces became more permanent. People could construct raised platforms, they could weave plant fibers, they could build wooden frames, they could use reeds, they could stuff coverings with softer materials. Eventually, these ideas began moving towards something we would recognize as a bed. In ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, elevated beds became associated with households and status. Being raised above the floor had practical advantages. It could reduce contact with damp ground. It could improve airflow. It could make insects harder to reach, and it could provide protection from some unwanted creatures. This is where the story becomes even more interesting, because the ancient bed wasn't simply a luxury. In many environments, raising the sleeping surface could solve real survival problems. The higher you were, the farther you were from cold ground, and sometimes farther from crawling insects. But there was still one thing ancient people couldn't control: their environment. Imagine trying to sleep while rain pounds against the roof. The shelter is damp, the fire is struggling, the ground is cold, the wind finds every opening. Modern humans can simply turn up the heating. Ancient humans couldn't. Their solution was adaptation. Shelter design mattered. Sleeping position mattered. Clothing mattered. Bedding mattered. Fire mattered. And perhaps most importantly, location mattered. Choosing where to sleep could determine whether the night was comfortable or miserable. A dry cave floor was different from wet soil. A sheltered rock ledge was different from an exposed field. A raised platform was different from bare ground. Humans learned to read these differences, and that ability probably began long before civilization. But here's something we often forget. Ancient humans didn't necessarily expect sleep to be luxurious. For us, comfort can mean memory foam, a soft pillow, a thick blanket, perfect temperature, complete darkness, silence. Ancient humans had a different standard. If you were warm enough to survive the night, if the surface didn't injure you, if insects weren't overwhelming you, and if predators stayed away, that could be enough. Comfort was relative, and the human body is remarkably adaptable. People can sleep in places that seem impossible to us, on hard surfaces, in cramped shelters, near other people, with unfamiliar sounds surrounding them. Our ancestors had to be adaptable because their environment changed constantly. But did ancient humans sleep through the entire night like we do? That's harder to answer. Sleep patterns varied enormously across cultures and environments. Some traditional societies studied by anthropologists have shown flexible nighttime routines, including periods of waking during the night. People might talk, tend fires, care for children, eat, watch for danger, or simply lie awake before returning to sleep. So the idea of everyone entering 8 uninterrupted hours of perfect sleep may be much more modern than we imagine. Night itself was also different. There was no electric light, no glowing phone, no television, no street lights. Once the fire went down and the sun disappeared, darkness became enormous. The night was not an empty background. It was an environment. Every sound mattered. An animal moving outside, branches shifting in the wind, rain hitting the shelter, another person breathing nearby. And because humans evolved in environments where nighttime could be dangerous, our brains became extremely sensitive to unexpected sounds in the dark. That strange feeling you get when you hear something at night, your ancestors had a very good reason to take it seriously. But there was another advantage to sleeping together: safety. Many ancient and traditional human communities slept in groups. This wasn't only about warmth. More people meant more eyes and ears. Someone might notice a strange sound. Someone might maintain the fire. Someone might wake when a child cried, and someone might react if danger approached. In this sense, sleep was never entirely an individual activity. It was partly a social system. While one person slept, the group could remain alert. And that changes the way we should imagine prehistoric nights. Don't picture one lonely human curled up on a cold cave floor. Picture a group, bodies close together, animal skins covering them, dry vegetation beneath them, a small fire glowing nearby, children sleeping beside adults, someone occasionally moving in the darkness, the smell of smoke filling the shelter. Outside, the landscape is almost completely black. Inside, humans have created a tiny island of warmth. That may have been one of the earliest bedrooms.
Not a room with walls and furniture, but a carefully controlled pocket of safety. And perhaps the most surprising part is how little the basic idea has changed. Our ancestors may have slept without mattresses. They may have slept without bedrooms. They may have slept without pillows that feel like clouds. But they were already solving the same problem we solve every night. How do you make the dangerous world outside disappear long enough for a human being to close their eyes? And perhaps the most remarkable thing is this: before humans ever built comfortable beds, they had already learned how to turn a patch of earth into a place that felt like home. If you want to explore more about ancient humans, feel free to comment below and subscribe.